objective framework and reasonable and prudent judgment. I think what we're talking about there is we're not really to look at emotions, we're to look at the practical side of this, the realities with respect to this building, and look at the totality of the circumstances and not look at it from an emotional standpoint. And I think if you do that, I think you end up with the right result here. We think, and we do appreciate planning department's analysis in the memorandum as well, and we'll get into that a little deeper later. But we believe when balancing the standards for the designation and the totality of the circumstances regarding this particular case, we think the overwhelming evidence supports the decision of this landmark designation as requested by the applicant. And we believe that principally for three reasons, but there are others that others will probably talk about today. And the first one is really the Clarinda-Page is not architecturally significant. Mr. Holland, the consulting architect, will get a little deeper into that as to why he believes that to be the case. Second, the current landmark designation causes exceptional economic hardship to the unit owners within the Clarinda condominium property regime. Jack Henry will talk about that, the hardship he's facing is by being an owner within this particular condominium regime with a property that's deteriorating substantially and significantly at an increasing rate. We'll get into that a little bit more later. The building, thirdly, the building has really outlasted its useful life and is not economically feasible to rehabilitate these structures. And Scott Samrat and also Tim Holland will kind of get into that in a little greater detail, but I wanted to at least outline our arguments. I'm going to touch on each one of those a little bit, then I'm going to turn it over to Tim Holland and Scott Samrat and then Jack Henry to tell their side of this as well. But the first reason, if you recall, was the lack of architectural significance. And according to Tim Holland, these buildings are a poor representation of the Georgian revival architectural style. And I heard someone say this, and I thought it was interesting. They said that the building really is nothing more than an eclectic assortment of design elements. And I think that's kind of interesting when you look at it, because it is sort of a facade. It really doesn't meet the standards of a landmark. It maybe shouldn't have been on the landmark designation in the first place, but you know, that's for the eye of the beholder. But I wanted to at least point that out. And it doesn't really have any architectural or historical significance in our opinion. We think the Georgian revival architectural style is better represented with respect to other buildings within the Omaha area, and Mr. Holland will point some of those out in his letter that was submitted as part of the application, so you hear about that as well. Then also, the second reason is the current landmark designation causes exceptional economic hardship, and I think this is really important to note because these units were renovated the building was renovated into the condominium units in 2007 and 2008, and they were sold for around $90,000 to $112,000 a piece. I think it's interesting in the assessed value in 2012, the average assessed value was about $61,000, but some of the units were actually valued at about $83,000. Well, if you look at the current assessed value, now this is for taxation purposes, the average value of these units is $38,000. So this is decreasing at an increasing rate, which I think is really important to note. I do have the assessment records for all 21 condominiums that I'd like to offer at this time. I also point out that this was part of an original redevelopment project. There was a redevelopment agreement and a TIF note, tax increment financing note. That public assistance is in place to provide for the renovation and rehabilitation of this building, and that was also done in 2008 with this project. And I think it's interesting to note that the principal amount of that TIF note to the developer was $320,000. Today, the balance on that note, together with interest, is $371,000. So what you have here is the values declining and the interest going up, with no ability to repay this TIF note. So what you have here is a failed redevelopment project. And you have very few of those, I think, in the city of Omaha. I do a lot of redevelopment projects downtown, and I don't think we've had too many of these that have failed, certainly not to that degree. I do have, as evidence I have from the Department of Finance within the city, a the amortization schedule that shows as of 12/31/2013 that balance being $300,000 $171,781.47 on the TIF. So it's going in the wrong direction, I guess is the point, so I'll offer that also. So then you get to the condominium association and the condominiumization of this particular property. And what you have here is the page being completely vacant. It's been deemed unfit for human habitation by the city of Omaha. The Clarinda has also failed as a condominium conversion. It's partially vacant. My understanding is there's about 6 units that are completely unoccupied. The bank has taken over a number of them as well. And it's also interesting that there's no active condominium association or board currently in place. There's no approved budget of the association. There are no assessments being levied or collected by the association, and there's no routine maintenance being made to the structure or the units, and there's no budget or ability to fund capital expenditures necessary to bring the building up to code or in state of good repair. Tim Holland has prepared a building assessment that identifies significant deficiencies with respect to the building. That's also part of the application. You have that, and he'll get into that in more detail, I believe, with his testimony here today. And then the entire structure has a number of building code violations, and those include, but aren't limited to, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical system violations, and those are also in the packet that was submitted with the application. The bottom line here is from a pure economic hardship, these unit owners are dying on the vine. I mean, their values are decreasing. They have no way out of this particular building. There's no way to bring it back up to a state of good repair. There's no money for capital expenditures. You know, I guess you put yourself in their shoes, and again, they're just dying on the vine. There's nothing they can do. They're in a horrible economic situation, and the only way they can get out of this horrible economic situation is to have this landmark rescinded so they can get out of it, and that the property can be put into a better productive use, and that's probably its demise and demolition and redevelopment within the structure of some kind. So the last item that I wanted to touch on is that the buildings have far outlasted their useful life, and it's not economically feasible to rehabilitate these structures. And Tim Holland and Scott Semrad-Aver and the village will also testify about this, but I think the simplest way to put it is the property is incapable, in our opinion, of earning a reasonable return, regardless of whether that return represents the most profitable return possible, meaning that there's nothing you can do to this building. You can put in as much money as you possibly can, but you'll never get an acceptable return. And you can put as little money in this building as possible, and you'll never get an acceptable return. It's just outlasted its useful life, and sometimes that happens with buildings, and we just have to move on and look to the future and do the right thing. We also don't believe that the building can be adapted for any other use, whether by the current owners of the condominium units or by any purchaser, which would result in a reasonable return as well. So what you're looking at here is probably the rescission of this particular landmark, the demolition of the building, and a new structure being in its place. With respect to the Planning Department memorandum, we agree that the building is not located within a local landmark district or a federal registered historic district. There's no indication that a reputable architect was responsible for the original design of the building. And the rescission of this landmark designation, we believe, will make way for higher and better use of the property, and will in all likelihood foster further growth and development in this part of Omaha. And we think that's important as well. I'm going to turn it over to Tim Holland, who's going to talk about the architectural significance and the condition of the building. And then Scott Semrad is going to talk about the feasibility of the rehabilitation, and also what this means if this building landmark is rescinded, and will and eventually, we believe, facilitate the further growth and development of this particular area. And then, of course, Jack Henry, the individual condominium owner, is going to testify about his economic hardship in having to live this out every single day of his life in this building. And then we're here to answer any questions. I would like to reserve some time for rebuttal, but I also just want to add that we respect the process, we respect
respective debates,